Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Imagine 10 years ago when Bitcoin was $1 and we told you that it would become a world reserve currency and trade in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you did nothing. Ha ha. Stacy.
Right. Well, you know what, Max? We are here in El Salvador at the airport, in fact, waiting for Simon Dixon to arrive. But in the meantime, we have this tweet. The El Salvador model is spreading. People like it when I discuss my own tweets. And this is referring to a story out of Arizona. A bill was introduced in Arizona to make Bitcoin legal tender in the state. So the model is spreading.
So in the United States, they have states' rights. And this is different than what you find in Europe. And it's different than what you'd find almost in any other country in the world. So if the federal lawmakers are not open to making Bitcoin legal tender, then the states are free to do so. We're seeing so in Arizona, looks like Florida, looks like Texas. People in Texas are actually talking about seceding from the United States if the feds just want to keep their head in the sand and don't want to compete on the world stage.
This is the state of Arizona, and they did in 2017 pass a similar law of making gold and silver legal tender. So states do have some sort of rights regarding this. But also this past week, what we saw, which was quite remarkable, was that Joe Biden, his administration, said they're looking at creating some executive orders, essentially like presidential orders, to deal with what he says is the national security element of Bitcoin. So as we predicted right here on the Keiser Report, we were the only people to do so way back in 2011. Certainly Max Keiser was predicting this would become a nation state level issue. And it now is that the most powerful country in the world, the empire, as it were, is concerned on a national security level about Bitcoin.
Right. When I first saw it, I immediately assumed that these executive orders were going to immediately get the United States mining Bitcoin as a national security issue because they want to remain competitive in the 21st century, especially with now Russia announcing that they are kind of leaning toward very heavily toward Bitcoin. It would be in America's national interest to start mining Bitcoin and accumulating Bitcoin. But on closer examination, it looks like the complete opposite. It looks like another incredible faux pas by America's lawmakers who, as Napoleon once said, when your enemy decides to destroy themselves, step aside. And I think this is the way a lot of countries are looking at the U.S. If they want to take themselves out of the game and be a minor player in the 21st century, it's not up to other countries to help, them to see the error of their ways.
The fact is, the president of the United States of America is having to respond to Bitcoin. I believe that Najib Bukele is the one that started this. This is how the game theory works. It worked like this in the individual level when we were talking about Bitcoin back in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. That's when the individual human beings around the earth in various countries around the earth, some like in Argentina or in Venezuela, where they were having very high inflation or hyperinflation, where they were the first natural people to gravitate towards Bitcoin. And then that drove other people around the world, like online porn or gambling or things like that, that were technically kind of not quite legal in certain jurisdictions. So you have the same sort of game theory happening. So one person, as soon as the first person moves, and that was Najib Bukele on behalf of El Salvador, it was going to force other legislative bodies or entities, nation states, or in the case of the United States, states. You could see similar in other federal sort of systems like that, whether it's India or Mexico or Brazil, like various regions might start breaking away and declaring Bitcoin legal tender.
Every country in the world will eventually make Bitcoin legal tender. The only difference will be at what price. We have El Salvador making the move in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. In the United States, they may wait until it's at 5, 10, 15 million a coin before they finally wake up. In any case, it's all good for Bitcoin hodlers. When these countries finally wake up, it's up to them.
It doesn't even matter if it becomes legal tender. The fact is the inevitability of it being the world reserve currency is inevitable. It will be the global trade settlement layer, no matter what. it is layer one money. There have only been two other layer one monies before. That's US Treasuries and gold. So here we have Bitcoin, and it is the inevitability of Bitcoin that is certain.
Absolutely. But it is a cute parlor game to see which country does make the move. As you point out, it's ultimately meaningless because Bitcoin energy use alone will defund fiat money, defund gold, defund the nation state, and defund central banks. That's already baked into the cake. So we have that to look forward to, but it's a fun game to see which politicians try to save their careers in this way.
We mentioned inevitability and we mentioned cakes. So the inevitability of all empires falling like a layer cake is upon us. Soon after, of course, an empire enters Afghanistan and then loses in Afghanistan. Usually their empire is falling apart. Well, it seems like the United States is also doing that. We've been chronicling this, of course, over the past 10 years. It could last another 10 or 20 years. Who knows? But right now, we see these sort of remarkable headlines, right? Breaking: a bridge collapsed in Pittsburgh hours before President Biden was scheduled to visit the city to talk about the infrastructure bill. Police reported the span came down around 6 a.m. Authorities said there were no initial reports of injuries. And this is a remarkable bit. Human chain formed to help after Pittsburgh bridge collapses. So we've gone back to like pre-civilization mode.
Right. Well, it goes back to 2008. Remember when Wall Street with Timothy Geithner and Hank Paulson, they put a gun effectively to Congress's head and said, give us many trillions of dollars to bail out our friends, or we're going to collapse the stock market. And so Congress acquiesced, of course, because they have no will of their own. And that money could have gone into infrastructure. So here we are 10, 12 years later, and bridges are collapsing, infrastructure is collapsing because America's being held hostage by financial terrorists. It's been this way for 20 years. There's no change that I can see. Bitcoin is the way out. But I think America's got a case of Stockholm syndrome. They've fallen in love with their captors.
So, of course, trillions upon trillions of dollars were printed, not just even in credit, like via the Fed and quantitative easing and expanding their balance sheet, but also from the actual US Treasury via Congress. When they had all sorts of fiscal stimulus, trillions of dollars were sent out. So we do have the inflation of that we've discussed, but apparently none of it reached anywhere, right? It all just either went offshore or to China to buy goods and services from them. So we have the dilapidated bridges. We have the dilapidated infrastructure system of the flights. Like, try to get anywhere in America, all these flights are being canceled. Max and I ourselves hung out at an airport for like 15 hours because our plane lost some parts, and then there were no shifts, like a crew to man the flights or like move the luggage and things like that. So there is a kind of entropy and dilapidation happening on the ground across the US, despite the trillions printed. Like, you would have thought that something would have been done, even maybe one mask, manufacturer would have been built, like something, but nothing apparently got done.
All right, and it's easy to prove this point. Just look at the money velocity, which just tells you of all the money that was printed, did any of it enter the real economy and cause real economic growth? And the answer is no. Money velocity kept going down to zero because all the printed money just went into the pockets of a few bankers who bought some overpriced artwork and some overpriced apartments on Park Avenue and parked a lot of that money offshore and was engaged in massive political fraud.
Now, this final headline here, I'm just going to read it. We're not going to comment on the actual headline because, again, this is a sort of deplatforming headline, and you don't want the director of national intelligence to say that, like, you talking about this headline might have like thrown elections or anything like that. So I just want to talk about this as an analogy and a metaphor for like what's going on in the rest of the world. Like, that if you watch the cable news, if you listen to the Fed's Open Market Committee meeting notes and stuff like that, if you listen to them speak at the podium of, the press secretary or something like that, like, none of it matches the real world in either direction. So on one hand, you have like Biden saying that this was the strongest economy ever in like 40, 50 years. And then on the other side, you see the data and you see deaths of despair all over the place. We've talked about that. But here, this is on the opposite side, like the constant fear mongering on all sorts of stories that will get you deplatformed if you try to contradict it. So I won't mention those. But the fact is, like, when you actually leave your house, leave lockdown, leave to the rest of the world, come to El Salvador, which is supposedly like, you know, run with gangs all over the place and homicide and murder, and it's paradise, right? So here's the headline, which is just so amusing. But this guy from the New York Times tweeted this, and without seeing like the humor in what he was saying. With the U.S. warning of imminent attack and NATO forces on alert, it is jarring to be sitting here in Kiev where Ukraine's leaders are acting like there is no new threat from Russia. I tried to unpack this contradiction here, as if the contradiction was from them, not you, like listening to your own cable news and getting the wrong story over and over and over and over again. This is, again, part of the nonstop end of empire, the inevitability of empire, because they always get to that point where they can't see themselves.
Yeah, the New York Times reporter was in Kiev and sitting at a cafe, and he noticed that, in fact, there was no crisis, which seemed to go against all the images on CNN. I remember Colin Powell and his little vial of baking soda that he waved around and said, Saddam's got weapons of mass destruction. Let's spend trillions of dollars for no reason. That's before we blew all that money in Afghanistan. Remember the Saddam hoax? So it's interesting that a New York Times reporter is not up on all the hoaxes. We should start something called hoax updates or something, because this guy was truly lost.
Well, I mean, the media is supposed to be that pillar between the population and power, and explaining the reality around you. So if they themselves can't see reality, if they're the ones that can't understand reality, and he's the one saying, well, the reality I'm seeing in front of me of people not being scared, they're wrong. They should be scared. That's a problem. This is a problem with the media right now.
It's like, I think, Scooby-Doo, where they go around trying to unmask the ghost, and they pull the hood off, and the ghost is us. You know, it's like, we are the enemy. It's us. Like, they don't understand that yet, that they're still believing their own propaganda, and that's kind of worrying. Anyway, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Simon Dixon of Banks of the Future. Simon, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
What an incredible adventure. You wrote the book in 2010, Banks of the Future, the first published book that mentions Bitcoin. And we met up at the 2011 Prague, which was considered to be the first Bitcoin event ever. And of course, back then, the price was $1 or less than $1. Maybe 50 or 60 people in the world knew about Bitcoin. And here we are in 2022. You've just arrived in San Salvador, El Salvador, and the country has made Bitcoin legal tender. What's your first impression?
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing what's happening here, but there's a lot of excitement. This is my third attempt at trying to support and be involved in a country that's going to actually do something with Bitcoin and benefit from the 69 million% returns that have been generated over the last 13 years. Individuals have benefited from it. Companies have benefited it. Now countries are benefiting from it. And El Salvador looks like they're finally doing it. When there was a little in the UK, back in the UK where we first attempted this, there was talk in House of Parliament today about the importance of supporting fintech and cryptocurrency. And it rewound me back over a decade ago when I was trying to say the same thing. And then the Bank of England decided to put their evil tentacles in and stop the UK from benefiting from it. So it looks like El Salvador is going to be the country that's doing it. The first government I've ever seen that says they're going to do something and then implements it faster, which is a really good sign. And so I think this is the country everyone's going to be coming to.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this is the third country that you're aware of that has tried to or talked about making Bitcoin legal tender. And but now they really have executed on it. They've done exactly what they said they were going to do in record time. They've got the government behind them. They're passing all kinds of new securities laws now to support the creation and distribution of volcano bonds, Bitcoin bonds. Now, Samson Mao over at Blockstream has said that he believes that the volcano bonds are the most important development in Bitcoin since Bitcoin. Your thoughts?
This is the country's opportunity to really show that a country can do something without a central bank having to deflate their currency, manipulate interest rates, and show that you can actually rely upon a central bank where you have absolutely no control over, and it's just regulated by maths and code, and that is Bitcoin. So to be able to benefit from not being able to change its supply, not being able to manipulate its value through interest rates, not being able to change it through open market operations and shenanigans, means that you actually get to just benefit from digital hard sound money. So now that the government is issuing bonds that are backed by Bitcoin, they get to show the world that you can significantly outperform anything that any government or central bank has ever created, independent of needing any intervention at all. So I really look forward to seeing where this is going. And if the next 13 years look anything like the last 13 years, then this is going to be the smartest move, and this is going to be one of the highest growing countries that out there.
The GDP is already up roughly 10% this year. It looks like it's going to double again next year. And these volcano bonds are really getting a lot of attention around the world. The IMF, of course, is nervous because they've had a monopoly or an oligopoly with these central banks for a long time and dictating economic policies around the world, even at the detriment of all these countries, including El Salvador. They put out a statement this week, Simon, basically begging El Salvador, please stop all this Bitcoin shenanigans that are going on. When you read something like that, what do you think?
Well, it's just natural behavior. The IMF want a monopoly, and the World Bank, these big, large organizations, inter-country organizations, they want monopoly. And, there's many documented history about the negative impacts that World Bank and IMF loans has had throughout Latin America and different developing countries. And of course, that is the strategy, is to lend as many dollars as you can, control the supply of dollars, and then have unaffordable loans, so that you can then have those dollars go back to the country. It was all covered in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And then once you've got that, you can lose sovereignty in that country.
Yeah, as you point out, the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman really detailed the whole process of making these egregious loans to countries and they can't pay them back. It's a wealth extraction scheme. The opposition here in this country is actually lauding the scheme and saying, we don't want to kick out the economic hitman. We think John Perkins in that book is a role model that we're trying to follow. That's how confused the opposition is here. Fortunately, they're minuscule and have no weight whatsoever. But let's talk about these bonds. What we know so far, it's a 6.5% coupon, 10-year bond, 50% goes into Bitcoin. We had a 5-year lockup. Half is earmarked for infrastructure, and the dividend is actually backed by tax, as I understand it. Is that what we're looking for? Any other color you can add?
We literally flew here, landed here, because we want to be first to see the securities laws and the prospectus. So there's been a lot of design work going on. I think Samson has been really supporting in that process, designing it with Blockstream.
Right, the securities laws are very important, right? Because the country is actually re-architecting their securities laws from the ground up to be Bitcoin-centric. So I think that's what, when people say this is the biggest thing in Bitcoin since Bitcoin, I think that's part of what they refer to, because this is the securitization of Bitcoin and the possible global securitization that comes with Bitcoin. And for countries like El Salvador, they could potentially retire all their IMF debt. They could retire all of their external debt, but it gets back to writing laws that are Bitcoin-centric. And I know you're anxious to actually see what's under the hood and what's going on. And I know the folks that are making the draft of these laws are anxious to get you involved as quickly as possible. I think starting in the next 6 hours, you're going to be called in to begin perusing. What do you expect to see, or what's your anticipation on that?
The securities laws are really the difference between whether you have a wealth effect in your population or not. So many Western securities laws, particularly in the US, UK, it's really been lifetime work for the last decade of really trying to get those so that they're more inclusive. Because the securities laws in UK and in US, they really do make the rich richer and the poor poorer. So if you get this right, you can really generate an incredible effect. We at Bank to the Future, when we first started trying to invest in Bitcoin companies, and we wanted to allow people to invest in Bitcoin companies, the regulators protected all of our investors from the highest performing asset class in history and prevented many people from investing in them. After 3 years of trying to change everything, we had to leave the country. We went to multiple countries in order to try and make this happen. So now we've built a decade of experience we could have all of the company, we've investments made through Bank to the Future are companies like $100 billion companies like Coinbase, Kraken, Bitfinex, Bitstamp. All of those companies were looking for a home at one stage. And whoever got this right could have had the whole industry in terms of all the jobs, everything that came from that, and hundreds of $billions of market capitalization as this industry grew. Now it looks like El Salvador's finally creating that home. And by getting the securities laws right, you can allow people, the population, to benefit from all the financial innovation that we've built over the years, and allow people to have retirement plans built around Bitcoin, and just really, have a wealth effect across all the people at every type of level, rather than just driving that wealth inequality that we see through draconian securities laws in other countries.
These regulators like the SEC in the United States, and they've yet to approve a Bitcoin Cash ETF yet, which is a remarkable example of protecting their sponsors, and those are the big Wall Street banks. They're a captured regulator. It's quite obvious. Same thing in the FCA. They're a captured regulator. They don't work on behalf of the public at all. They're lining their own pockets, obviously. But here in El Salvador, there's a chance to create securities laws with the benefit of the population, of the average person, right?
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. We have this asset class that has been the highest performing asset class in history. Regulators protected their population from having 69 million% returns. And yet El Salvador can come along now, and they can build custom-built securities laws that allow countries, and their country initially, to benefit from Bitcoin through the Volcano bond. And then they can have individual level products, they can have company level products, and they have country level products. And to build the securities laws based upon what we know about the technology today is a huge advantage, as we've seen in other areas like Africa, just leapfrogging banking and going straight to more advanced technology with their financial affairs. And I can't wait to see, this is what this is all about. And the securities laws is a vital part of it. They got the legal tender, get the securities right, and you've got your double punch.
There is talk of El Salvador becoming effectively the Singapore of Latin America, of Central America. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's bigger than Singapore. I think Singapore is, a haven across Asia. This is the reinvention of securities markets, bond markets, currency markets. This is setting the example for the world that, this is more like a Bretton Woods II moment, where money is being renegotiated. And the US put itself at the front of that and then reneged on the gold standard that they negotiated in '71. This is Bretton Woods II being renegotiated, but based upon digital hard sound money that nobody controls. So there's no vested interest there. There's no central bank or company or country that's going to benefit from that, because anyone can participate. So if El Salvador gets this right, I think this goes viral across Latin America. I think this goes, and it then goes up the chain. The very last country that will adjust to this will be the ones that have the vested interest. The European central banks, the Federal Reserves, the US, the Europes of the world, the Britain, the pound. They'll be the last to adjust. So this, to me, is a David beats Goliath moment that can have game theoretical, where the earlier you adapt and follow what El Salvador does here, the more likely you are to benefit until the very last person or the very last country that adapts to this. So I think it's much, much bigger than just creating a Singapore here.
Well, we already know that a lot of things happening in Argentina now. Brazil is stepped up, start talking about Bitcoin. Other countries in Central America are now rumored to be possibly in line to make Bitcoin legal tender in the very, very near future. Well, anyway, Simon, it's great to see you. And I think that the A team is in place for this volcano bond to really take the world by storm. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this whole journey. I can't wait to see where we go next.
All righty. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Simon Dixon of Bank to the Future. Until next time, bye, y'all.